Welcome to the Public Thought Leadership event of 2026. Our series highlights research supporting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We are proud to be ranked number 1 globally in the Times Higher Education University Impact Rankings for sustainability for 4 consecutive years, celebrating our commitment to sustainability. This series is part of the Western Sydney University Sustainability and Resilience Decadal Strategy 2030. Today, we have our second workshop in Financial Literacy series. Before we start, let me acknowledge the country. With respect for Aboriginal cultural protocols, Western Sydney University Library acknowledges the traditional custodians of the unceded lands and waterways on which our libraries are located and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. The university works across many different lands and acknowledges the Daruk, Yora, Dharawal, also referred to as Tarawal, and Wiradjuri peoples, and thanks them for their support of its work in their lands, Western Sydney and beyond. Financial literacy is a powerful tool for reducing social and economic inequality, and it's a skill everyone deserves. This 3-part workshop series designed to build financial confidence and strengthen your practical money skills. Associate Professor Michelle Cull, our facilitator, is an expert in accounting and financial planning at Western Sydney University. With more than 2 decades of teaching experience, their research focuses on financial literacy, ethics, trust, and education, and aligns strongly with the United Nations SDGs. Michelle has led numerous initiatives supporting financial literacy across diverse communities, including migrants, students, and women in trades. In our first workshop, we have explored how to create a realistic workable budget, that is budgeting basics. Today, we have our second workshop, your financial well-being, and this will help us to learn how to complete a personal financial health check and explore strategies to support long-term well-being. And our next workshop, which is the third one in this series, is on next Monday, which will focus on your financial vision. So a warm welcome, Michelle, and all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that lovely welcome. And I'd like to welcome everybody as well and acknowledge that I am coming to you from Dharawal country today. And also I'll just make note that we are recording this session. So we are asking you to feel free to share some of your experiences, but just note that this is being recorded. So thank you for being here today. I'm really excited to present today's workshop because I think undertaking a financial health check is really important for everybody, regardless of your life stage or your financial position. So what we'll be doing today is building a little bit on our first workshop, which was building a budget. And then we will be looking at the sorts of things that you need to be looking at for just checking where your finances are at across a range of different areas, perhaps some that you may not have thought about being related to your finances before. So I'll get started. I do think we might have some other people join us along the way, but I'll just share my screen, and I will be sharing it, and then I'll stop sharing it at certain points throughout the presentation just to check in and see how people are going. Okay, so what we'll be covering in today's workshop. So to start off, we will be just, and these are all just very simple check-ins, all right? We're not going into a lot of detail because this is a financial health check. And just to start off, we will look at your financial goals because that just puts everything else into context. And then cash flow and budget, and that will relate much to what we covered in last week's workshop, which also leads us on to savings and then debt management, superannuation, protecting your assets, estate planning, and then what your next steps might be. All right, so I thought maybe just before I get stuck into the first topic of today being your financial goals, I wondered if anybody wanted to comment or even use, maybe what we might do is use the react button at the bottom of the tool there. You can see if you have a look at that reaction, you've got like a thumbs up, or you've got like a green tick, a red cross, for example. So I wonder if any of you do regular financial health checks. So if you do, maybe a thumbs up or a green tick. Maybe if you don't, you can choose a different reaction. Excellent. Excellent. So most of you already do that. That's fantastic. Well, hopefully this will still be helpful for you. What we do recommend is that if you're doing a financial health check, it's helpful to have a regular check-in. So every 6 to 12 months, absolutely every 12 months. What suits people is very different. I mean, March is often a really good time to be undertaking a financial health check because it's just after the beginning of the year where you've got your New Year's resolutions and you might have set some new goals so you can see how you're going if you're keeping on track with that. But also it gives you enough time if there's any financial decisions that you make that might be impacting on your tax as well. So it gives you an opportunity to seek some financial advice or professional advice to assist you in ensuring that your tax matters are in order, ready before the financial year. So, for example, if it meant that you wanted to contribute extra money into your superannuation, just as an example. So, March doesn't have to be it for everybody. Some families like to get together and do their financial health checks. They might pick a special date that's important to them. It might be a particular public holiday, long weekend where they've got time to sit down with the family and discuss these sorts of things. So that's just the first thing that I wanted to cover there. But great that you're already doing these financial health checks. So I'll just go back to my screen here. So when we're looking at reviewing your financial goals, as I mentioned, you may have made some new goals at the beginning of the calendar year. But when we're talking about short-term, medium-term and long-term financial goals, the short-term tend to be those more immediate goals. So things that you might want to achieve this year, maybe next year. So that could be maybe a holiday, it could be maybe a new piece of technology, a computer perhaps, or maybe even a car. For some people, that might become a medium-term goal. So medium-term goals might be also, it could be maybe a larger holiday. It could be planning for a big family event, perhaps a wedding or a special birthday celebration. It could be paying your home loan down or off. So depending on where you are in your life cycle, that could change for different people. And longer term is, of course, much longer than that. So, and also it might be even when we're looking at your life cycle, it could be paying off student debt. So that might be a short term or medium term goal. It might be planning for a family. But then the longer term, it might be maybe uh, buying a home or upgrading your home. It could be planning for retirement. So there are a number of different goals and it's different for everybody. But part of your financial health check is just to check in on those goals. How are you going? Did you set some goals maybe 2 or 3 years ago that you actually haven't really been working very well towards? You still haven't achieved those goals. So let's revisit them. Let's then have a look, and this is our next step, have a look at the budget and see if our budget is reasonable. And are we putting money aside for these particular goals? Do we have enough surplus? Do we need to reduce spending? Those sorts of things. So I'll move on to cash flow and budget. So we had a big discussion over 2 hours in last week's workshop around preparing a budget, and we looked at money in and money out. And part of the financial checkup is just reviewing the last few months of transactions. How are you going against your budget? Are you actually spending what you thought you would spend, or are you spending less or maybe more? And why is that? Is it because you've evened out expenses over the year? Or is it because you've had a huge expense that wasn't budgeted for? So have a look at those last few months of transactions and also check that what you've been budgeting has been realistic, that you haven't been put in your budget that your groceries were going to be $100 a week, whereas in fact they might be $250 a week. So just checking that that's all good, because it's no use having a budget if it is not realistic. Then, of course, what we looked at when also preparing the budget, and the same thing happens here with the financial checkup, is to identify any essential or your needs, those sorts of spending, and then any discretionary spending and any wants that you can trim. So often we look at things like regular subscriptions just to check, have you got maybe more than what you really need if you are trying to save a little bit more money? Are there other things that maybe you're spending a little bit more on? Can you maybe review your bills, your utilities, your electricity, for example? Can you find a different provider that might be cheaper, or your internet provider? What about your mobile phone? Those sorts of things there. So this financial health check, we're just starting off with our cash flow and budget, and it's going to lead to many more checks as well. But it all comes back to the budget and your goals at the end of the day. We talked last week about building an emergency fund as well. So how is that going? Do you have your emergency fund there? Do you have at least 3 months of living costs? Maybe you can put a little bit more in that emergency fund just to make sure you've got enough there should you need it. And then just update your budget. So review your budget and update it to include any increase or even decrease in bills if you have managed to find a provider where it's a little bit cheaper. But of course, we know that costs are going up for many things. So things like your insurance renewals or your mortgage or your rent, you may need to increase that as part of your budget as well. Are there any questions at the moment from anyone? No? But just as a reminder, our 6 steps from the budget process that we covered last week: working out what your total income is once you've updated your budget, work out what the money out might be, as we've just discussed, and then estimate what your expenses will be once you have removed anything that maybe you cancelled any subscriptions or anything else that you'd no longer need. As we mentioned before, what were your financial goals there? What were your short-term, medium-term, long-term goals? Do you have enough surplus for those goals? And how will you distribute that surplus towards those different goals? So what can you do if you have a budget surplus? Well, we're hoping that that's the case. If you do have a budget deficit, that is, you don't have any money left over, you might be spending more than what you earn, then it's going back to that step where you're looking at reducing your expenses or increasing your money in. But some of the other checks that we'll be looking at later today may also impact on your budget and that budget surplus or deficit. So what can you do with your budget surplus? So you might want to save more to reach one of your goals, or you might even want to consider investing some of that surplus or putting it into your superannuation fund. Now, today we are going to do a quick review looking at doing a check on your super, but in these workshops we won't be talking about details around how to invest your money. So if you are saving your money, it is important to have a strategy that does actually help motivate you a little bit. You might want to use an app to help you save where you get rewarded and where you can track your savings. But also we talked last week about structuring your bank accounts so that you've got savings for different types of goals and needs. So your more immediate needs versus your more long-term needs. So sometimes even if you don't have that much money left over, every little bit that you can save can help. And if you are someone who manages your money by withdrawing your weekly expenses to spend on those everyday items, and you have, a little bit of money left over, just saving like a money box system, just saving every little bit that you've got left over, it still can build up rather than you wasting those funds that you've got left over. But as we mentioned last week, there are some great apps that you can use to help to manage your money and to save. There are even apps that round up purchases you make to the nearest dollar and puts that into a savings account for you. You can also find different savings accounts that reward you if you don't make withdrawals and you make regular deposits into those accounts and you don't make a withdrawal, and that they can sometimes reward you with some big bonus interest payments. So we did say though, the trick is really in not spending money. That's how you save money. And we are going to talk a little bit more about saving money and how you can make your savings grow. So first up, just looking at basic accounts where you earn interest. Now, I also want to put forward a disclaimer here. When we're talking about interest, I know depending on different cultural values, some people may not be in a position where they are able to invest in an account where they're earning interest. So there may be other ways that you can earn your returns, and that's very much similar to how we look at different investments. So we're just for now though, I'm just going to focus on how interest works for people who are using interest-bearing accounts. So I know this might be going back to basics for some of you, but it's still a nice reminder about how compound interest works. So who can tell me what the difference between compound interest and simple interest might be?
Um, so I think compound interest is the interest earned on the interest. So a simple interest is like if you have $100, you make earning like 10% interest on it. So that's $110. But then the interest on those $10 is the compound interest. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, no, that's really well explained. So in other words, if you've got the $100 and it's simple interest, at the end of the year, you'll have $110 at the end of, and then you'll take that $10 out, the extra, let's assume, this is an assumption with simple interest. So $100 becomes 110, you use that $10 interest. The next year you get another $10 interest. With compounding, you leave the interest in the account. So at the end of the first year, you've got $110 and then that gets invested. So the following year, you've got interest on $110 instead of $100. Yes. So, well, why is this important? It's because the secret to saving is in compound interest, because when we keep compounding, it actually makes a big difference over time. And I'm going to just share a chart that just as an indication to show you what that might look like. And this is because it's really important that even if some people only have small amounts to save and they don't realize how much interest can make a big difference to those savings if they start early and regular. So just here in this particular chart, you can see how the simple interest, it still increases, but at a much slower rate. With compound interest, at first, it doesn't seem to make such a difference. But then over time, because it's compounding on those smaller amounts over and over and over again, it actually starts to increase quite rapidly. So this is why it's important to find the right type of account that you're leaving your savings in, and that every little bit of the interest rate that you have on that particular bank account can really help make a difference to your savings. But this also works in reverse. So if you've got savings in your account and you're compounding those savings, you're leaving the interest in there and continuing it to compound, that's great. And you're going to build your savings very quickly. But it also works in reverse if you have debt. So mostly now, most bank accounts, that whether that's for savings or whether it's a mortgage, use compound interest. So it also means that if you're not paying down that debt very regularly, the interest that's being calculated on the debt is compounded as well. So that's why making extra repayments can make a big difference, because it's affecting how it's compounded at the end of the day. So if we have just a little look at your savings, how much are you saving against your goals? And are you on track? Why? And look a little bit at why or why not. What's stopping you from making those savings against your goals? and then have a look at savings accounts. So even though we don't like to hear, well, many people don't like to hear that, say, the interest rates are going up because most people have a mortgage, and it does affect, or not, I shouldn't say most people, many people, uh, and it does affect the mortgage interest rates, which of course we can see also can impact on rent that people are paying because the landlords are having to pay more. But for some people, interest rate increases can be a good thing because they're earning more on their savings and more on that compound interest. So check how much you've got in your savings accounts and how those savings accounts work as well. So not just what the interest rates are, but how often is the interest compounded? So is it compounded yearly, monthly, or even daily? So if it's compounded daily, then you're going to make more interest income on those savings. So it's good to check that with your bank accounts. Some different accounts, as we mentioned, have bonus interest, but also some savings accounts might charge you fees. And so it's a good time when you're doing your financial health check just to compare to see, are you getting charged any specific fees on your savings accounts? Is there maybe a savings account that you can switch to where you won't get those fees and charges? But also, if you're saving for a longer term goal, some people might find it a little bit tempting to use those savings when they see their savings grow and use them for other purposes than what they were originally intended for. So in some cases, the way that you access your savings account may impact on the type of savings account you have. You may actually want a savings account that's a little bit more difficult to access so that you're not tempted to use those funds. So it's just something else to think about. And as mentioned with compound interest, let's do a little look on what debts we have as a bit of a financial health check. So to start off with, do you know how much you still have left to pay on any loans that you might have? So that's the first start. A lot of this is all about awareness, just knowing where you sit with your savings and with your liabilities and your debts, what you owe. So how much do you have left to repay? And what are the interest rates and fees on those debts? Because some people have multiple debts. So we might want to look at prioritizing which debts we repay first. And there isn't one rule. Everyone's situation is very different, but we tend to look at prioritizing that high interest rate, interest debt because of compounding. We don't want a small debt to become a huge debt in the long term because of some very high interest. So perhaps some people have the Christmas period or the sale period, they've used some sort of loan system with some of these big retail providers where, they give you items on an interest-free period. But what actually happens is on those interest-free periods, you're receiving statements and you're getting charged a per month fee, just even if you're not paying any interest. So you might have 12 months or 2 years or even 3-year interest-free periods. So many people might think, oh, that's great. I can use these items. I've got my money in the bank, but I'm not going to use that. I'm going to earn my interest and I'll pay it at the end of the interest-free period. But this is where some of these providers earn their money because they're charging you fees just for holding that account. So that's something to consider, that you might want to just pay that out if you're able to, or pay it down. And many of them do have very high interest rates after the interest rate period. Some of them could be, 15 to even 20% interest. So you don't want to be caught out and forgetting that you've got these debts there. So that's just something to check what your debts are. And remembering this can also impact on your credit rating if you do forget to make a payment when the end of that interest rate period comes. But also, let's say that you've got a short, medium or long-term goal of borrowing money for a home. The more debt that you have and the different, if you've got multiple debts, that's also going to impact on your ability to borrow for something else down the track. So that's something else to consider, maybe which debts can you repay first. So check the account keeping fees, check the interest rates. And also, if you do have a mortgage, for example, you might want to do a mortgage check. So have another look at what features you have on your current mortgage, and your finance provider is usually very happy to discuss your mortgage with you. So, why not take advantage of having a bit of a chat? I know it's time, and for many people, this financial health check doesn't happen because you keep putting it off for later, which is why I recommend that you do have a specific date or month each year that you review these things, just to make sure you keep things in check, because you might find something, maybe you're paying for features that you don't need, or maybe you have features like a mortgage offset account that you can have that you're not using. So mortgage offset accounts can be really helpful because basically the savings that you have is offsetting the amount that you're paying interest on. So let's just say, to make it easy, let's say that you owe $200,000 and you've got $50,000 saved up in your bank account. If you've got a mortgage offset account, then your interest will only be calculated on the difference if you've got that 50,000 in the mortgage offset account. So rather than the interest being calculated on the full 200,000, it would only be calculated on the 150,000. And even if you've only got a small amount of savings, because of compound interest, this can make a big difference to the final amount that you repay. Now, that's something to consider. If you have a redraw facility, for some people that might give them comfort that they know if they pay extra repayments off, that they can tap into their mortgage later if they need it for some sort of emergency. But having those facilities can sometimes mean you're paying a slightly higher interest rate. So you have to work out what's best for you and your particular financial situation. And what's the term of your loan? And that your frequency of payments. So the more often that you're paying, making repayments off your loan, the less interest that you're paying. Once again, due to compound interest. Most loans are compounded daily. So the more often that you can make those repayments, that reduces the interest that's calculated each day. Depending on the institution that you're with, some may only let you go down to fortnightly payments. Some will allow you to do weekly payments. It all depends on the terms of your loan. But also it depends, once again, if you're getting paid monthly, weekly, fortnightly, that might affect how you want your repayments made as well. But looking at the term of the loan, so have you got a loan over very, very long, like 30-year loan term? If you just continue to pay the repayments that the bank is telling you, do you really want it to take you 30 years to pay that loan off? Noting that if interest rates continue to go up, that maybe that will take longer. Are you able to maybe reduce the term of your loan and increase the frequency of payments? So they're just things, once again, it's just a check, just so that you know where you're at, and if there are any items that maybe might help you if you make some changes. You could consolidate your debts and refinance, so that's another thing to consider. But we just want to be careful that although this can be really helpful and help you save interest if you've got some loans that are on high interest, you don't want to keep consolidating debts and refinancing, and then the bank or the finance provider encourages you to borrow more than maybe what you really need, and then you end up back, still making those repayments and not really achieving the goals that you originally set out to achieve. But it is something to consider. At the same time, you do have to note that there are some setup costs when you do consolidate your finances. And maybe that you can have a discussion with the finance provider about reducing those upfront fees as well. But just checking your interest rates and fees, have a look around at other providers as well as your current provider, and don't be afraid to go back to your current provider and let them know that you've been looking and just asking if they can give you a better interest rate. Even some employees can obtain a reduction in interest rates, even though it might be a very small amount. It can make a big difference if they're working for a large employer, like such as the university, for example. Some large employers have special arrangements with financial institutions where staff members are able to achieve a slightly better interest rate. So look into that. It's not always promoted. So if you do have any sorts of employee benefits, go and check what those benefits might include. I might just pause there for a minute just to see if there's any questions from anybody.
No, no questions, but this facility, I wasn't aware. I was working with the universities long, long time, but I, yeah, it wasn't widely promoted, isn't it? Staff benefits, we see some gym membership, things like that.
Yeah, so there are a lot of staff benefits that, I mean, as a financial health check, you could be looking at anyway, right? I didn't have that on the slides, but generally, employee benefits should also be considered as part of your financial health check because if even if it's related to, fitness membership, a lot of large employers are offering the fitness passport now. That might be much more, or, save you a lot more money than if you've currently got another sort of gym membership. That's just another example. Or if you're looking at purchasing a new car, perhaps that's an option for you through salary packaging that might have some benefits. But for some of these decisions, the financial health check helps you to look at things and know where you might need to make changes. But at some points, you might need to actually, if you do want to make those changes, it might be a good idea to get some professional advice just to make sure you're making the right decisions. Okay. So I've just talked a little bit about how you can negotiate some better rates for mortgages or, consolidating your debts and paying down your debts quickly. But sometimes when you're doing your budget and you're doing your financial health check, things might not be in the situation where you're able to do that. And in fact, you might be finding that you're really struggling in being able to pay the debt that you currently have. So in that case, you might need to take some other steps. And for example, you might need to look at extending the term of your loan rather than reducing the term. So but if you're able to extend the term, it can reduce the amount that you're paying regularly, but it will just be paid over a longer period of time. So over time, you are actually paying more interest, but for the time being, in the shorter term, it just takes that burden off you and it means that you can still make those payments. So it won't affect your credit rating because you're actually still making payments. You're not missing payments. And then you can always change it again later down the track once you find yourself in a better position. So that's something definitely, once again, always, um, don't feel afraid to give your financial institution a call and discuss the options that are available to you. There are laws in place that mean that they must be able to assist you if you are experiencing some difficult circumstances. You could negotiate a payment plan if it's creditor. So if you maybe, there's bills that you haven't paid, it might not be a particular loan. It might be a phone bill or energy bill or something like that. So you can negotiate a payment plan with them. So rather than, if it's due at the end of the month and you know that you're not going to be able to pay that, you can ask for a payment plan where you can make smaller payments regularly until that's paid off. You can also, sorry, you can get some free financial counselling if needed as well. So that's something to think about with the National Debt Helpline, and they'll actually help you to negotiate those payment plans or, if you're not sure how to deal with some of these situations, you can get that help from a financial counsellor.
Meritia, you want to ask something?
No, no, I'm fine. I did have, I don't know, oh, that's sorry, I couldn't see some of my screen then. Oh, just there are some serious steps as well that you can take if needed. I think we mentioned them briefly last week, but you can organise a debt agreement or very seriously, you might have to go through bankruptcy, which it sounds terrible, but in some cases it can actually help provide some relief if you are in those dire circumstances. But there's usually other things, other steps you can take before you get to that. And the Money Smart website has some more help there. But I do recommend if you are experiencing any issues in that regard, the first step is to call the National Debt Helpline and you can go from there. All right, so now I'm going to get on to something well, I think it's very exciting, which is your superannuation. So, um, a lot of people are confused about superannuation, not sure how it works. It can get very complex, and there are complex rules around superannuation, but that doesn't mean that you can't do your own financial health check. So just going to go through some really quick basics with you now, just to ensure everyone has those basics before you do your health check on your superannuation. But if you're working for someone else, then you'll have money put into super by your employer. So that's the compulsory superannuation guarantee laws. So your savings in your super grows because when your employer pays money into your account, then it is invested. So currently, superannuation is 12% of your ordinary time earnings. So that's a fair chunk of your pay going into super, and that money is yours. It's not the super funds. The super fund is looking after it for you, but it is your money. So it is important that you understand what's in your super account and how it's being invested, just as you would with any other savings. Now, you can make additional contributions to your super yourself on top of the 12%. So you can make before tax contributions or after tax contributions. There are limits to how much you can pay before and after tax. I would love to get into the detail because I love talking about superannuation, but we're not here to do that detail today. But just note that if you do make additional contributions and you want to make them before tax, for example, that reduces the tax that you pay currently. But superannuation does get taxed in the fund itself. So depending on whether you've made a before tax contribution or an after tax contribution will make a difference as to how much tax is paid and where the tax is paid. So whether it's paid on your income or paid when on your super or when it goes into the fund. So superannuation is taxed at 15% when it goes into the fund, but if you've already paid tax on it, so if you're making a super contribution after tax, well, of course, it's not taxed again. But any investment earnings, so while your money is in your superannuation fund, whether it's all invested in cash or it's invested in the share market or whatever it might be, those investments, they are compounded. So they go back into the super fund, and this is why is so important and it can grow to such a large balance. But it's very important that you also choose where you invest your super funds for that particular reason. So where is it invested and what sort of risk are you willing to take and how long until you're going to need to access your super fund? And your super can also have insurance built into it. And what a lot of people don't realize that is that, in fact, as you do get closer to retirement, you can actually, as long as you've reached 60 years old, you can transition from your super account into an income account to pay yourself a regular income in retirement. So there are a lot of different circumstances that people find themselves in. So you don't need to fully retire to access your super account, but there are different rules around how that plays out. But note, even though your superannuation is taxed when it goes into the fund and the investment earnings, that's what I failed to mention before, the investment earnings are also taxed at 15%. When you take your super out, when you retire, if you put that, take that out of your accumulation account and put it into an account that's going to pay you an income in retirement, that will be tax free when you take that super out. So it's something that at the moment is still very helpful for people that maybe they don't know. And there has been a lot of, I suppose, miscommunication around when you are able to um, access your super because people confuse it with your age pension. So the age pension can't be accessed now until you're age 67. And there are rules around your assets that you own and, whether you're actually able to access the age pension. But we're not going to get into those details. Once again, today we are just looking at a health check. So just knowing that your superannuation is being paid by your employer, that's one check. Knowing who your superannuation is with and how much you have, you do receive regular statements from your super fund. Uh, and noting that your superannuation needs to be enough to provide for you when you have retired. And people are living much longer now, so the average age expectancy is well into the 80s. So if you do retire at 60, you need that income to provide for you for at least 25 years. But once again, I did say superannuation is yours and you can choose how your super is going to be invested and when you want to access that once the laws have been met. And one other thing to note is that superannuation is protected from creditors. So if you have had difficulty paying some of your bills, although you've probably heard, if you've got a home or something, if it becomes quite dire, you might have to sell some of your assets to help pay your debts, but superannuation is protected. So that's one thing that creditors cannot access. So when you're checking your superannuation, what sorts of things should you be checking? So some of these things seem basic, but it's just so important. And that's why we've got today as our financial health check workshop. So even things like checking that your contact details are correct, that your name is correct, that your super fund has your tax file number. All of these things are really important. Very basic, but just a good check to do. And I mean, with all the scams and things that are happening as well, it's good to be more regularly checking on your super as well, just to check that everything's going well with that. But I'll also put a warning out there that there are some scams where you may be contacted by people claiming to be able to provide you with something better than your current superannuation. So just be very careful around the sorts of information that you provide for people and whether changing your super fund to someone who's just cold called you is really something that you want to do. So this is where professional advice can become much more helpful. But to start with, just checking your contact details. You can check that directly with your super fund. I would also suggest that you check your superannuation through your MyGov website. Your balances should also be available there. So you can check that that's all there as well. If you've got super from previous jobs, maybe from when you were much younger, that might show up. If you have a look at, through MyGov, you might find that you've actually got some super that you didn't know that you had. And if that's the case, you might want to consider whether you take that super out and put it into your current fund. We now have super choice. So when you do join an employer, you no longer go into the default option um, unless you get to choose, make a choice. And if you don't make a choice, it will go into the default option. But the default option is now not the default of the employer. The default option is any existing super account that you have. So that's called super stapling. It's some legislation that came in a few years ago to try to help people to streamline their super so they didn't have multiple super accounts every time they changed jobs. But have a look at your super balance with your super fund. So how do you know what your super balance is? Check, have a look at all the contributions that are being made just to make sure that your employer is making those contributions. So they need to be made every quarter. And noting from the 1st of July this year, you've probably heard something around payday super, which now means that employers need to be paying your super um, immediately into your super account so they don't wait the full quarter. I've just seen that there was something put in the chat then, so I'll just have a look at that there. Yes, okay, so you had some rollover charges. Yeah, so that's what you've got to really weigh up whether it's the right thing for you. So just be very careful around whether it's you instigating the rollover or whether you've got pressure. There's a lot of pressure, high pressure sales tactics being used. It's probably something that you want to be a bit more cautious about. and perhaps even contact the super fund that you're going to roll your super into and ask them any relevant questions before you do actually do a rollover. Okay, so with your superannuation, once you've checked your super balance and you've checked the contributions that are going in, you might, I suppose you don't have to do it all in this order, but you also need to check who is your nominated beneficiary. So many of you, when you joined your super fund, you probably were asked to nominate a beneficiary. So can I maybe have a reaction like a tick or a thumbs up if you know that you have nominated a beneficiary for your superannuation? Okay, good. That's a really good start. But what some people don't know is that the beneficiary that you nominate cannot just be anybody. There's actually regulations that the super law has around who you can choose. So I know when I started my first job many, many years ago as a young person, um, my first full-time job, I put in a beneficiary for my super, and that was my boyfriend. Of course, I wanted everything to go to my boyfriend at that time, but that would not have been binding at all. You need to, any beneficiaries for your superannuation have to be either your spouse or a dependent. It cannot just be anybody. So this can be a little bit tricky if you are, say, a single mum of adult dependents. So you might have, 25, 30-year-old children and you're single, you have no spouse. So who can you leave your superannuation to? Well, I'm glad you asked. So um, when we're talking about a nominated beneficiary, a lot of people, as I mentioned, like I did when I was very young, I nominated a beneficiary, but that is not binding. So that's just something that you're asked by your super fund, and they may take that into consideration, but the trustee of the super fund doesn't have to. And there are very, very strict rules around this, and for good reason. So if you haven't done what's called a binding nomination on your super account and you're doing a financial health check, absolutely you should look at that. It's very important that you look at doing a binding nomination, which I'll go into in just a minute. If you have a binding nomination already, make sure that you are reviewing your binding nomination because things do change. Your life changes over time. And if you haven't updated that in accordance with your circumstances, it may not reflect what you really want it to should something happen to you. And, you don't want to leave a burden on others to sort that out. So you've probably heard on the news a lot of issues where people have had problems accessing their spouse or maybe their elderly parent's superannuation, and it's taken a really long time for the super fund to pay it out. Well, although some super funds may be taking a bit longer than they should, a lot of this actually goes back to the fact that the individual who was passed has not had a binding nomination. So a binding nomination makes it really easy for the super fund and for the dependents to actually make a claim on that super fund. Okay, so I'm getting there about, yes, if you don't have any dependents or a spouse. So when you make a binding nomination, you can nominate for that to go to one person who must be your spouse or a dependent, or even it could be that you want to split it between dependents. You can do that and you can put a percentage split. Or what you might want to do, you might want to actually say that it's going to be paid to your estate. So superannuation doesn't automatically form part of your estate. So when you do a will, you can't say in your will, I want my super to go to my 3 adult kids, because that's not how it works. Your superannuation is covered by a trust, and money can only be paid out according to the rules in that trust, which are also governed by legislation. So your other option is that you can say that you want it to be paid to your estate. And that's why you need to have a binding nomination, particularly if you are a single mother with adult kids. So then you can have it going to your estate, and then when you make your will, you say how you want your estate to be distributed. Now, binding nomination is called binding because the trustee must follow the binding nomination. All right. Some binding nominations only last for a few years. Some binding nominations last until you change it again. So that depends on your individual superannuation fund. All super funds will have a location on their website, or if you go there in person, they'll have a form. If you ask your super fund, does it cost you anything? You ask them about completing a binding nomination. But what I would suggest is that you do get legal advice. And I know these things all cost money, but it can it can actually save a lot of money down the track for your dependents if you have this sorted early. And maybe that's something you need to put back into your budget if this is something you want to do. But it's definitely worth looking into to have that binding nomination. Even if you put a binding nomination in, if you've got nothing, it's better to have something. And then you can go and get some legal advice as well. And if you need to change that binding nomination, then you can change it. So it's very important that you do that. Now, you would know if you have a binding nomination because it has to be witnessed. It's not just a matter of just putting a beneficiary and sending a form off. So look into that with your superannuation fund if you haven't done that yet. All right, another thing to think about is the insurance that you may or may not have within your super. So that's something also to check because you might not know. Do you have automatic insurance cover, life insurance, or um, total permanent disability cover maybe in your super? So have a look because those any insurance policies that are within your super, the insurance policy is paid out of your super fund. So the deductions for the insurance premiums are made out of your super fund. So for some people, they may be happy with the insurance that they have within their super. Others may want to go elsewhere. We're going to cover insurance separately in just a moment. But you need to know whether you have that cover. And the other thing, if you do have insurance covered within your super, if you stop working and regular payments stop going into your super fund, you may find that your insurance cover is no longer. Okay, so that's something else to check. So you need to really, all those product disclosure statements that you get, you need to read through all the information that is available for you for your super account. And if you don't understand anything, it's actually up to the superannuation fund to make sure that you do understand. So you can call them and ask questions just to ensure that you do understand what you've got. Don't think it's too difficult. It's your money. You need to check that it is suitable for you. So that's also looking at the fees and charges on your superannuation account versus maybe the performance of your superannuation account. So you will be getting regular updates as to the performance of your super. And yes, it does move up and down. And if you look at some of the research that's been done on this in COVID, the amount of super switching that was done was at an all-time high. People trying to switch out of one investment fund and into another investment fund because they were worried about what was happening all around the world with COVID. We've got a lot of events currently. There's always some sort of externality that can impact on our investments, but it probably is not a good idea to rush and chop and change your investments. What the research has shown is those people who continually switched their super ended up losing overall, whereas those people who just maintained their superannuation didn't tend to lose quite as much. Of course, every situation is different, but if you don't understand how your superannuation is invested, you might want to ask some questions about that. But once again, you could look at getting some professional advice as well. If you have a financial advisor, a professional financial advisor would be the one who would be able to tell you, yes, we recommend, such and such has happened. We recommend that you changed your super fund. or you can ring them and ask them if there's certain events troubling you. They will be able to tell you what the best strategy is for you. But understanding, first up, once again, your financial health check. Do you understand how your current superannuation is invested? So some people might not know the split. So we've got like the different asset allocations. So is invested in cash? How much is in Australian shares? How much is in international shares? Just for example. And then you can even break that down more. There are now some ethical superannuation investments. So if you don't want to be investing in coal, for example, or any gambling products or alcohol, those sorts of things. So it's sometimes some super funds offer specific types of investment funds that you can choose. So doing that financial health check is going to be very helpful to your long-term well-being when we're looking at superannuation. Are there any questions before I go to the next slide?
Um, just one question. I have UniSuper thing and sometimes they help, but just I couldn't understand how it works. And they send a lot of things as you say, but it's so long, so I just ignore reading. So especially with this insurance, I have to go back and read it. Insurance within Super. Thanks for that alert. It's so important. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes, no problem. And this is why you need to set the time aside too, isn't it? There's a lot to check and it can take some time, but a lot of this is all related. And this is where financial advisors can be really helpful because if you decide that you're going to change your superannuation, they might be able to actually recommend the best insurance for you or a better super fund that's got less fees but maybe better returns that suits your circumstances. But then you might want to make extra super contributions and that affects your cash flow. That's all related. Lynn has her hand up. Lynn, you had a question?
Oh, yes, Michelle, thank you. And I'm sorry if you've already answered this. I can see that Meritia has put something in similar about a single mother with adult children. So if you do make it a binding, because I can see that my super has an option for me to change that to a binding nomination. So where does the actual money go to, and how does that work if I change it to a binding, like in the event of my death?
Okay, so you can have the same beneficiaries in a binding nomination. Either way, it still has to be like if you've got dependents, it has to be a dependent or a spouse. But when we're looking at, yes, if they're only adult children, so if the adult children don't live with you, you don't have anyone dependent on you, then your only option really is to have a binding nomination where you choose for it to be, um, I can't remember the exact term, but it's basically it's paid to your estate.
And does that mean then my estate is, so then in my will, I work out who is gets my estate. Is that how it gets broken down? Yeah.
That's
Okay.
correct. That's correct. Yes.
With a binding nomination, you really need to have a will and
Yes.
a rock
If
solid.
you're going to do that, you would need a will. So I'm going to cover that in a minute as well.
Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, good questions. All right, so I'm going to cover the will after insurance. So we just cover insurance first, and then we'll get back to looking at your estate planning. So another financial health check. Gee, there's a lot of things to check here, isn't there? So we talked about looking at insurance in your super. So then we've also got insurance for, well, there's other personal insurance, and then there's also protecting your physical assets. So part of your financial health check is checking first up that you do have insurance in place for these sorts of items. But secondly, maybe checking that the insurance that you have is still the best insurance for you and that you're getting the best deal. So this can take a little bit of time as well. Personal property, so your car, your house, boat, caravan, jewelry, art, those sorts of things that you might have. Um, that's important, of course, to protect that should something happen because they're your biggest investments, particularly your house. You've got a huge mortgage. If something happens to your house, you want to ensure that it's insured. And usually your mortgage provider would specify that you have to show that you have comprehensive home contents or home insurance. So when you're looking at your house, also, if you're renting, you might want contents insurance if things are stolen from your home. But remembering when you get your house insurance, if you've built a house on land, you're not insuring the land. So if you've paid $1 million for your home and land, you don't need to insure the building for $1 million because the land will still be there. So just taking into account what it would cost to substantially rebuild, like clear the land if something was to happen to your home and rebuild your home to the same sort of specifications. So that's one thing to look at, but also with your house insurance is any insurance is looking at exclusions. So what's not covered by the policy? Do you have to pay extra to ensure that some things are covered? So looking also at like fire and theft and flood, those sorts of things, those events, how does that cover your property? And when we're looking at car insurance, some people might find that, they didn't pay too much for their car. They look at their car insurance, it's very expensive. They might not want comprehensive car insurance, although it might be needed if they've borrowed for their car. But if you don't have comprehensive car insurance, you still need to get third-party property insurance. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just ensuring, I know most people probably know this already, but third-party compulsory insurance is not the same as third-party property insurance. So third-party compulsory insurance is your green slip. If you're in New South Wales, it's your insurance that you pay with your registration that covers individuals if something happens to someone while they're travelling in the car. It covers that person. But in terms of if you do damage to, if you accidentally go off the road in the wet, let's say, and you go through a fence, or maybe even damage a car that might be parked on the side of the road and a house, you could be up for hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage if you haven't got comprehensive car insurance, but you have third-party property insurance that will cover the third property, the other property. And it's very realistic, the premiums for third-party property. It won't cover your own car, but it covers the other property. So if you're not looking at having comprehensive car insurance, absolutely you should at least have third-party property insurance. I have heard of many people who have been uh, in difficult situations where they have actually had accidents and they haven't had that third party property insurance and they've had to then get a loan to pay for the damage to property that's been damaged when they've been driving their vehicle. So something to think about there. With your house insurance as well, looking at the sorts of things that are covered in your policy and whether you actually have to make extra payments and specify if you do have any other specified contents that are of high value. So sometimes jewelry or art isn't just covered under your contents insurance with your house. You actually have to specify it to be covered and you may have to pay a slightly higher premium. So just taking note of that. So it is important sometimes to read through that fine print. If you don't have health insurance, that's something that you may want to consider. I know it can be expensive, but even if you get just the basic cover, you can find that that can be really helpful in helping you cover your health needs. If it's whether it's dental or optical or physiotherapy, or whether you need to go into hospital for a procedure, that can be very helpful. There's also rules around the premiums that you pay and whether you've joined from a young age, and if you have, then your premiums will be lower. Otherwise, there's a surcharge if you wait until you're over 30 to join. And also the Medicare levy surcharge, if you earn over a certain amount and you don't have health insurance, you have to pay an extra levy with your Medicare levy when you do your tax. So there can be advantages by instead of paying the surcharge, putting that money into some health insurance. But shop around to make sure you do get something that is more suitable to you. For example, if you're like me and you're very unlikely to be having any more children, you probably wouldn't want to be covering obstetrics and paying extra for that cover if you're not going to be using it. So other sorts of insurance to look at is your total and permanent disability insurance. So, first up, for many people, they may have the luxury of having a full-time job where they have sick leave. If something happens, they might be able to be entitled to, say, 10, 15 or 20 days of sick leave. So they know they'll still get paid. But if you have something that's going to have you off work for a bit longer than that and you haven't done you've hurt yourself not at work, so you're not covered by workers' compensation. You've hurt yourself doing something else and you can't continue to work. Well, there may be income protection insurance, or you might also look at the total and permanent disability insurance or even trauma insurance. So there are some things to look at there. If you don't have that type of insurance, that might be something to check. And of course, life insurance. So if you have people who are really dependent on you, you might want to do a little bit of a needs analysis to see whether you might want to cover yourself for life insurance and how much that cover might need to be. So I'm not going to get into all of the details. We don't have time for that today, but there's some things to at least start looking at. Okay, and as I have continually mentioned, check what you are covered for and what you're not covered for. So it's not enough to just check for, like, you go like, oh yes, I'm covered for this, I'm covered for that. That's all good. Make sure you check for what you're not covered for, what the exclusions are, and compare the different policy features and premiums so that you're getting something that is right for you. So that is really important. Even with the car insurance, for some comprehensive car insurance policies, as an example, you might get free windscreen cover. You might get up to 2 windscreen replacements per year or something like that, whereas others it may be an additional cover. So, but once again, you look at the premiums and how that's being covered. Maybe if you don't drive your car very much or you don't drive it at peak hour times, there may be a policy that with a fund that you can take out that actually rewards you for that because you're much lower risk. So your premiums would be lower. Are there any questions on the insurance part for now?
Mirita made a comment on
Oh, right.
comment him.
Oh, yes. I was going to mention that as well. Thank you. Yes. So you do, when you're looking, if you are applying for some of these sorts of insurances, you do need to declare any medical issues that you have. So that's really important, and sometimes that may affect your premium. But if you don't declare it and something happens, they don't have to pay it out because you haven't been honest. It's the same with your car insurance if you've had car accidents or speeding fines, those sorts of things. A good thing to not get any speeding fines is to just not speed, right? Because your speeding fines are not just a fine, it also then increases your insurance. So that's something else to consider. If you're younger and you take out health insurance, well, that's good because you probably don't have any any medical illnesses to disclose or less likely to. So that can be helpful. But if you do have some medical illnesses, it shouldn't stop you from applying for different types of health insurance. And there is a lot happening in terms of legislation at the moment because some personal insurance funds have been looking at mental health and also making it harder for people who have disclosed mental health to get insurance, and the government's trying to look at how to better manage that.
Michelle Mirita has raised her hand.
Yes, Marita.
Thanks, Michelle. Look, I'm just wondering, how does a full-time, I'm a full-time student, have been, this is my last year, but one of the things that's been playing on my mind is how do I protect myself if I'm not working? I can't get like income protection because I'm not working. So there is no income to protect.
Yes.
Is there anything else that a full-time student can do so that, if you did have a car accident and you're in hospital for a period of time and you can't pay the mortgage for whatever reason because your scholarship stops or whatever, what happens then?
Okay. We can look into, there's many different types of insurance, so you can look into that. You might even want to speak to an insurance broker. But there are other things like your TPD insurance that you could look into as well for, if anything major was to occur. But I'm even wondering with income protection insurance, I I would have to, I don't want to be, probably best for me not to say anything specific here because I don't want it to be that I am providing advice. uh, I would suggest that maybe you speak to an insurance broker and see what options might be available to you there. That's probably the best advice for now. But yes, it's a very good question, and because you could consider that maybe your scholarship income is actually income, is some sort of income that you are earning. As a fallback position, though, and I know it wouldn't be enough, but as a fallback position, that's why we have welfare and we've got Centrelink, for example. But as you have just explained, if you have a mortgage, that's not going to cover that off, and that's where you would then go to the bank and also negotiate some other arrangement. But I'll come back to that in just a minute when we're looking at estate planning. Vanessa, insurance being subscription based, I'm not sure what you mean by that. I think you're meaning like it comes out every month. It doesn't have to be. You can pay for insurance up front, and sometimes you can, if you've got the funds to do that, you can actually make some big changes with that. I don't know if you want to maybe clarify what
Oh,
you
okay.
mean.
Thanks, Dr. Cull. So it's just the way that I think about insurance, and as I've seen happen to other people, is that the moment that they stop the insurance, then that's when all the benefits, no matter how many decades they've had life insurance, as soon as they stop the payment, they're no longer eligible for anything beyond that. So it's that whole consideration. If you're continually paying into it, then they would give you a look in. But as soon as you're no longer attached to them in any way financially, then it makes it very difficult, unfortunately. But I know scholarships do include some insurances, but I'm not sure if they're financial.
Thank you, Vanessa. Yes, it is important. If you want to pay for your insurance upfront, you can do that. But many people I suppose it's like subscription based, where it's like a monthly payment taken out of your account. But that raises something very important once again with your financial health check, to check where these amounts, what accounts are they being paid for? Do you just ensure that you have surplus funds, that you've got an extra couple of months cover in those accounts? Because if you miss an insurance payment, yes, it may mean that you also miss the cover of that insurance, no matter how long you've been paying it for. And the same thing goes for when you're reviewing your insurance. If you're finding something that's a better offer, always make sure that you keep your previous cover until the new cover can start. Don't cancel one until you're sure about the new cover, because that's also caught some people out in the past, and it's not a good outcome. So just be aware of that as well. But thank you, Vanessa, for that.
And Lisa, yeah, the comment. Yeah.
Yes, another comment. So some health funds also have an option where they can provide a small amount of cover if you're injured in the short term. Yeah. So there are a lot of different products out there. It's just a matter of finding what the right one is. So that's part of your financial health check. You could be looking at that. Thank you, Anissa. All right. So I've got even more. I haven't got the dot point here on powers of attorney that we're also going to talk about. So with estate planning, you'll remember that we talked about your binding nomination with your superannuation fund. So part of that also requires that you have a current and valid will. So I've put current because once again, circumstances change. Have you had kids that have now turned 18 or finished full-time study, or have your living arrangements changed? Have you got someone new living with you? You're taking care of maybe an elderly parent that you weren't doing before. So many different things that can change. Have you been married or divorced, or you have a partner living with you or not living with you any longer? So that can make a difference to how your um, finances might play out should something happen to you. So is it a current will and is it valid? So this is where, once again, I do recommend that you seek legal advice to make sure that your will is valid, and they can also check that you do your binding nomination, do all of those things all at the same time. And very important because you don't want to go to the trouble of sorting all that out, not doing it through a legal practitioner, and then it's invalid anyway. So consider when you're doing this who the beneficiaries might be. You need to have an executor, like someone who will make sure that your will is carried out the way that you had intended, and also other instructions. So what your funeral arrangements might be. And this once again is also where some people might consider it is important to ensure that there are funds there to cover funeral arrangements. But even as part of your estate planning, not just putting the instructions in the will, if you're able to have get together with the family. Depending on the circumstances that you're in, and maybe have that conversation early so that your family know what it is that you really would like to happen should you pass away. So it's not left to some awkward situation where you've got a lawyer reading out something that's in the will. It can help those around you to also know, feel more prepared if something was to happen, if they actually know. And there's other questions that you might want to think about when you're looking at making your will, such as resuscitation as well. That's something that's important to consider because sometimes those near to you need to make decisions about that. But if you seek the advice of from a legal practitioner, they will take you through all the necessary things that you need to consider. If you can't afford a legal practitioner, you can get your will prepared for free by the public trustee in your state. If you are eligible for a full, or I've got the full central age pension, that any full pension there, you should be able to go and get some help. Um, I like that, Marita. Very good. Yes. And it's important to let your executor know where to find important documents as well, so that if they need to access them, they can. Now, one dot point that I didn't add there is a power of attorney, so that you've actually got people in place, and your legal practitioner will go through this with you as well. But so you've actually got someone there that can, if you need a medical decision made, that you have somebody nominated, or that if you want, you could look at an enduring power of attorney where someone can also make decisions around your finances if yours somehow, something happens to you, maybe, I don't want to give specifics, but where you're unable to make those financial decisions for whatever reason, there may be someone that you can nominate that can do that, but you really need to get legal advice around it. I'm just letting you know that is something to consider.
There is a
So,
question from Meritia.
yeah, Maritia, you seem to have everything very well
Organized.
organized. Yeah, it's good. Are there rules around who the executor is? That's probably a question more for the legal practitioner. But if you're thinking, can the executor be a beneficiary? Of course they can be. But it's usually somebody who you would trust, who already has a little bit of an idea around finances as well. But it is a very important role because there are laws around, if you're an executor, how you actually ensure that you follow what is in that will, and it's very strict. So, it includes filing the deceased tax returns even. It's very it's can be very involved. A lot of documentation that needs to be filed. Applying to the super fund, for example, if there's a binding nomination in place, or not a binding nomination, like ensuring that the super funds come through. There's a whole range of things there. So it doesn't have to be a family member. It doesn't have those same rules as superannuation. It can be anybody who you trust to be in that position. Sometimes you can actually have, I won't go in, I actually won't go into it. I'll leave that for you to seek some legal advice, but there are a lot of different situations depending on your own personal situation on how you might want to manage that. All right. So if you don't have a will, I know like it seems like something so basic. It's so important then people tend to just think of it, oh, I'll do it later, I'll do it later. It's just a good idea to get one done. And once you've got a will in place, it's not so hard to then update it regularly if you need to. And if you're looking at having something done, if you don't have a will, and you don't want to make an appointment that's going to cost you a lot of money, I think even though it can be very helpful, I think also you could look at some solicitors do like will nights, like express will nights. So if your will's not going to be too complicated, that might be something that works for you. So you can just rock up on one of those will nights and sit with a solicitor and get that will done. But it's normally more for the more simple wills. So the more complicated it is, the more it will cost you. Part of your estate planning is also considering if you own a home, um, considering what sort of tenancy arrangements you have in that home, because that can affect whether the home can, whether it's distributed according to the will or just according to how who actually owns the home. So that's another important issue. So if you've got joint tenancy, for example, then it will automatically go to the other person or other people who you have joint tenancy with. So that's not something that you can put into a will because it's already decided for you. These are the sorts of things that a legal practitioner will ask you and make you aware of and help explain so that you understand. If you don't have a will, we actually have in Australia, well, it's state-based as well. I'm sorry about that. But if you die without a will, what's going to happen? So it's called, what we call that is a person has died intestate if they die without a valid will. So even if you have a will but it's not valid, this is what will happen. So it will be, your estate will be distributed in accordance with your own state's laws, estate planning laws. And usually that means that it passes to the deceased's next of kin. So first a spouse. If there's no spouse, then it usually goes to children. And if no children, then it goes to parents, and then brothers and sisters, then grandparents, then aunts and uncles, then cousins. So that's sort of the order that it will take. And if there's no valid will in place, then it takes a really long time to go through the courts before anything can be distributed. So it is a good idea to really get that in place. All right. So what are the next steps? Well, you want to continually be reviewing your finances. So that's something that you don't want to just do once a year. As I said, even twice a year is good, or at other times when circumstances might change. The other thing that we haven't discussed today, because this is more just a quick health check, but I didn't want to get into all of the details, is looking at different investment options. So if you do have investments, you would also be reviewing those investments to see how they're going for you and whether they're achieving what you had set out to achieve and whether they're right for you with your goals and your current situation. Also, the taxation implications. So when you're reviewing your finances, some of the things that you do may have tax implications. So we haven't covered that today. That's something else that you might need to get some professional advice from an accountant or a financial advisor. So just depending on what it is that you're looking at doing. I wanted just to ensure that everybody knows how to find a registered financial advisor, because some people are a little bit reluctant to see advisors. You might hear some things in the media, which sometimes the media refers to financial advisors as people who have provided financial advice, that they might not actually be a registered financial advisor. So it's just important to know how to find the professionals. So on the Money Smart website, even if you search financial advisor register, the Money Smart website actually allows you to search for one by their name or their ABN. So if there was an advisor that you were looking to see, you can check them on that register. You can check their qualifications, that they're still on the register, whether they've had any problems, complaints made against them, all those sorts of things. So that's something to do if you do go and seek some advice. And you can even go to the, if you're looking at accountants as well, you can go to the professional bodies and usually do a search as well, or even to search for someone in your local area through those professional bodies. So whether it be CPA Australia, Chartered Accountants Australia, New Zealand, or whether it be the Financial Advice Association of Australia, just as some examples, they can often point you in the right direction there. All right. So, are there any questions?
Just a comment. Financial advisors are so expensive.
I know this is something. I was at the Financial Advice Policy Summit a couple of weeks ago, and this is something that financial advisors as well want to be able to change, because we actually don't have enough financial advisors at the moment in Australia for our population. So we have a few pressures because the standards of financial advisors have been raised substantially in terms of education, professional and ethical standards. There are increased barriers to entry. So while we now have a lot of new financial planning degrees for new entrants to the profession, we're finding that it does take a long time to train new entrants up to be able to be a full financial advisor. So because they also need to do a professional year, a national exam, and those sorts of things. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you very much. But it is important to look at whether you can get some financial advice, or even when it comes to your superannuation. If you've got questions about your super, the first point of contact is to go to your super fund, because they can provide you with some general advice, just not specific financial advice. They can refer you to a financial advisor then if you want to. And sometimes those financial advisors are not related to the super fund. They are external. But we're trying to increase the supply of financial advisors as well. And the government is looking at introducing, perhaps they're just looking at it, another type of advisor who can provide some advice, but not to the same extent as a current financial advisor with a full financial plan, but at least that they understand some of the ramifications of tax and things like that, and provide some limited advice to people who need it. But as I kept saying, like, contact all your providers, whether it's your bank, your superannuation, your insurance provider. Ask as many questions as you can and make an informed decision. I think that's what's most important, is being aware of the sorts of things you need to be looking for and asking the right questions. That there are some first steps before you see a financial advisor. And then if you do see a financial advisor, you're, already at a really good place where you know exactly what you want to discuss with them, and you can make the most of what your fees are paying for. So thank you very much, all of you, for being here today. I hope you have learned something valuable. And we've got one more workshop next week, which is your financial vision. So that's a little bit of fun, thinking about, well, what is it that we want to achieve? No use having your savings and investments and then you don't get to actually use them in the future. Or maybe you just need something to motivate you. So we'll look at that next week. But thank you to each of you for being here today.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, everybody. See you at our next workshop.